the province of Ontario passed into legislation Rowan's Law, a landmark concussion safety legislation. It protects athletes by having mandated concussion codes of conduct, removal from sport, and return to sport protocols for sports organizations and educational institutions.
Now, it's named after Rowan Stringer, a high school rugby player who died in 2013 from second impact syndrome after sustaining multiple head injuries. Well, a new report out this morning, just about an hour and a half ago, which happens to be Rowan's Law Day, shows a drop in sports-related brain injuries in 2018 and 19, which coincides with the passage of Rowan's Law. So joining us more to talk about this is Tim Fleiszer, Executive Director at the Concussion Legacy Foundation of Canada. Tim, good morning to you. This is really interesting because the findings aren't necessarily what was expected, but it's found a reduction in brain injuries, et cetera. Can you talk a little bit more about what this may mean for sport and for basically brain health?
So very encouraging data initially to see almost a 10% drop in sports-related traumatic brain injuries. Now, Dr. Jesse Young, who's the lead author on this work, would adamantly say, you know, we need to be careful in that we don't necessarily know that this was caused by the introduction of Rowan's Law, but it does appear that the law is working.
Yeah, there's definitely a correlation, but you know, you can't really say direct cause and effect. However, it's quite alarming to know that 37% of brain injuries reported between 2010 and 2019 are sports related. We look at hockey, we look at football, all these different kinds of sports where there's high impact. Can you talk about what it was like before this law came into place? What was happening? Were people just being sent back into play? How did it work?
So for context, all 50 states in the U.S. have passed some form of concussion legislation. And so we've been a little bit slower to move on this in Canada. And I think having a law, and you know, Ontario has demonstrated this, really suggests a structured approach to handling this problem, which we know is far more pervasive than anybody originally realized.
Yeah, Tim, I think, you know, especially high school football, I think, is a classic example, or even hockey, where it was like a player would, quote unquote, get their bell rung, right? That was the term that was used, sort of sit on the bench for a little while, maybe even throw up, and then the coaches would put them right back on. That's not allowed anymore in this province. You talk about all 50 states having that. Ontario is now kind of a leader in Canada, isn't it, based on Rowan's Law? Because you can't do that anymore. You can't just put a player back on after they've, you know, sustained a head injury.
Ontario has absolutely been the leader in Canada on this. And at the recent FPT meeting in August, Minister Lumsden stood up and asked the other provinces to think about adopting Rowan's Law. And I'm pleased to say that we've already booked meetings with over a half dozen of the other provinces and territories. And so I'm optimistic about this trend and other provinces adopting legislation across Canada, which is absolutely needed.
Yeah, I'm quite frankly surprised that it isn't nationwide yet, given the frequency that we're seeing these injuries. For someone that does hit their head, like what's kind of the first step when it comes to Rowan's Law that is the protocol for what a coach or parent should do?
So the first thing is, if there's a player who's suspected of having a brain injury, you need to remove that player from play immediately and make sure that they're checked by a healthcare professional before they return. And this was the information that would have saved Rowan Stringer's life. Today in Ontario is Rowan's Law Day. And so children across the province are getting this information as a result of Rowan's Law. And we hope that this moves across the country with all the other provinces and territories, because it's absolutely needed in terms of protecting our kids' brains.
Yeah, hey, brain health is health overall. Tim Fleiszer, appreciate the time this morning. Thanks for being here to share this.
Yeah.
Appreciate this.
Thank you so much,
Thanks
Tim.
for having
Appreciate
me.
it.